Well, good afternoon and welcome back to another Fridays from the Van. Going to start this out by apologising for any background wind noise. It is very, very windy here, and even though we are just parked up on our drive, there's still a fair gust coming through, and you can probably see things jiggling about just a little bit. This actually reminds me of some pretty stormy nights we've had in the van where you're thinking, are we going to get toppled over? So to kick things off, on my YouTube channel I have already put together a couple of travel reviews. So we spent 6 months touring Northwest Scotland in 2019, and I've already put up a little travel review from Shetland and also one from the Outer Hebrides, and I've been meaning to sort of complete that set by putting together a little travel review from Orkney, and that's what we'll do now. So we'll jump over to the screen and I'll talk you through for a few minutes our trip in 2019 to Orkney. So this was actually part of our 6-month tour of Northwest Scotland in our converted VW T6. Sadly, Guinness is no longer with us, but she used to travel in the van with us as well. We actually split the trip up over under Orkney. We had a week on Orkney and then we headed over to Shetland for 5 weeks and then came back and had another couple of weeks on Orkney. If you're more interested in the travel vlogs, then you can still see those on our Traveller's Cookbook. So Orkney itself, archipelago off the northeastern coast of Scotland, I think it's most famous for its Neolithic sites. What really surprised me was the diversity of the landscape, the huge mountains on the island of Hoy, through a lot of the sort of flatlands on the mainland, but it's certainly most famous for its Neolithic sites. And while we were looking forward to going to Orkney and exploring, we were more interested in Shetland, and so Orkney was almost a stopover for us, and that's doing it a complete disservice. It was a fantastic time, and it's certainly somewhere that I would love to get back to. Now, on our time, we obviously spent time on the mainland, and then you can head down to Ronaldsay and Bersay over the little causeways, and then you can get ferry across over to Hoy, Rousey and Westray, and that's what we did. We didn't make it to some of the other islands. I found it quite funny that upon arriving on Orkney, one of the first little scenes that I found below my feet was almost looked like a map of the UK with Orkney up here at the top. I just thought that was quite funny. So first night we headed across a couple of the causeways down to South Ronaldsay and stayed on Hoxa, and immediately my eyes started to turn to the smaller details. Thought this was quite comical, almost like one of those masks that you see were worn across in Venice. But this would actually become a huge part of my trip, not only in Orkney but in Shetland as well, looking at the smaller details. And a lot of the images of those smaller details have been shot on the iPhone. Now, on that first night, or the first couple of days, whenever we were just exploring, it really was about getting my eye in and really just making little sketches. And it's one of the reasons why I'd love to go back to Orkney, because I don't think I did it justice. And I don't think you can do it justice, especially when you're travelling to a number of the different islands on your first visit. But the smaller details on some of the beaches were just fantastic. Really friendly for camper vans as well. In fact, I was thinking as I was putting this piece together, we were there for 3 weeks and I don't think we stayed on a single campsite. I could be wrong, we might have stayed for one night or something. No, we did. We stayed up at a campsite when we were doing a running event, which I'll talk about in a moment. But apart from that, lots of little park ups like this here. Just beautiful, gorgeous views, lovely light, and a great place just to have your home on wheels, and you can step outside and do a little bit of photography. And of course, the conditions weren't half bad as well. We actually got very fortunate with the weather across our whole 6-month trip. In fact, I think I've said this before, in the 6 months touring Northwest Scotland and the islands, I think we got maybe a couple of weeks worth of rain and never on more than a couple of days in a row. But the conditions were just beautiful. This was again one of the first little wild camps that we stopped at. We went across to the Broch of Bersay. This is an uninhabited island off the northwest coast of the mainland of Orkney, and it's accessible via a little walkway that obviously gets covered over at high tide. Huge amount of bird life if you're into birding, gannets and various other birds, but it was a beautiful island to explore, and probably a couple of weeks, maybe a week or so beyond the best of the heather, or the best of the little flowers, along the cliff edge, but still made for some lovely images and some lovely scenes. One of the reasons for heading up to Bersay was to take part in a marathon, half marathon, 10k, and unfortunately I suffered an injury in the weeks leading up to this, and so I wasn't able to train for the marathon, so we both ended up doing the 10k. Now I also went along and to the Orkney distillery, Orkney brewery, and that was a very nice day indeed. And of course, oh no, we have a twat here, which of course is yours truly. That was actually on the day that I don't always walk around with a medal around my neck. That was the day that we finished our 10k, which was fantastic. Did the 10k. We actually were staying on a campsite right next to the finish line, and then later that evening there was a ceilidh with lots of great food. Oh yeah, bugs. This was on that campsite. I'm not quite sure what happened that night, but they all decided to hatch, and they all decided to basically get jiggy with it on our van, and then promptly died. Now we were still clearing bugs out of vents and out of grills and out of nooks and crannies in the van. 6 months later, it was horrendous. The whole van was completely covered. As I said before, it was the smaller details, and on some of the beaches, the patterns on the rocks were just incredible. I mean, I could have literally spent the whole time on one or two particular beaches, and just some lovely late evening side lights sort of illuminating some of those patterns in the rocks. Not to mention patterns in the pancakes as well. We took a real fad at making pancakes in the van, and not a bad view to have your morning pancake with. I think Nicola also found a retirement home for us as well. This was actually down at Hoxa. This is again a little sort of causeway with the sea inlets on both sides, and we did a couple of walks around here looking for otters and other wildlife. And then we headed across to Hoy. Now, the main reason for going to Hoy, for me, was heading down to a location that had been made famous, in my eyes anyway, by Joe Cornish in one of his books. Nicola obviously wanted to go and see the Old Man of Hoy, but we spent a few days across on Hoy, and we started to get a little bit of sea mist coming in from time to time, which allowed for some nice atmospheric conditions. But again, you can see that some of the cliffs and some of the sort of areas along the coastline, again, okay, a very overcast and not very interesting light day here, but just in terms of the rock formations and the structures, pick one of the islands in Orkney and you could spend, your whole trip there. But the reason for really me wanting to visit Hoy was to head down to Rackwick Bay, which is absolutely stunning. Now, I had planned to stay the night in the little hostel, and Nicola was going to just stay in the little bothy. However, the midges that night were absolutely horrendous, and in fact, the midges for the couple of days that we were on Hoy down at Rackwick were just completely horrible, and it did make photography very, very difficult. But not before I did manage to get some of my favourite images from the actual Orkney trip. Just lovely stones and rocks, and again, the patterns on the actual rocks themselves. And I did get some lovely evening light, but unfortunately with a lack of wind, the midges were just completely horrible. Now, we got the ferry over to Westray, and one of the main reasons for heading across to Westray was to actually go on a little 10k run. But it was a 10k run with a bit of a difference. So we basically started top right hand corner. For some reason my little mouse isn't working here. So top right hand corner, and we then ran, I think it was about 3 or 4k or maybe more down to the bottom of the island on the right hand side. And then we jumped on the world's shortest commercial flight and flew across to Papa Westray. And that was incredible. I think it took 1 minute 32 seconds or something. It was just fantastic. And then we ran back up on Papa Westray, and we ended up getting a little fishing boat, a little ferry, back across to Westray. And we were the only people on the ferry that morning, a little tiny ferry that morning. And then we had a couple of K back to the campsite, but not before stopping off for a big wodge of cake. So it was a 10k run with a plane journey and a ferry as well. I think all 10Ks should have that built into them. Later on that day, we got on our bikes and cycled up to Noop Head. Absolutely stunning place to watch the bird wildlife. And again, just some incredible cliffs. And just, I loved that, the contrast of the blue water and those lovely lichen-coloured rocks. And you can just about make out a gannet here on that image on the right hand side. As I say, we cycled up to Noop Head on our bikes, and this is after doing the 10k run as well. So all in all, it was a phenomenal day. Rounded off just outside our little campsite that we had booked for a couple of days, watching for otters. And I think looking back on it, and Nicola and I were talking about this the other day, without being too dramatic, I think this was, I think, 7th or 8th of July 2019. Honestly, I think this is the last time that we were both completely happy. Unfortunately, the following morning after this, we had a bit of a medical issue with Nicola, and so we had to start considering breaking the trip and coming back to Northern Ireland again, which is in fact what we did. Now everything was fine, and we did end up heading back over to Scotland and heading to the Outer Hebrides. But then of course it flipped over to 2020. Not long into that we lost Guinness, and then of course the rest of 2020 went to hell in a handbasket, as they say. But I really do think this was just an almost perfect day. The run, the flight, the scenery, the bike ride, a bit of photography, a bit of cake, just perfect. And I guess, striving for happiness, I would put this right up there as something that was just fantastic. We then headed back over to Orkney mainland again, and again back at looking at the smaller details in the landscape. I love this image on the right hand side. It almost reminds me of a sleeping dragon, as you can see, some lovely light again. But again, just looking at those smaller details in the landscape, the sand patterns, just sort of the simplicity of the wind-blown patterns in the sand. And again, a lot of these images just on the iPhone, or in fact the little X100T. It was in Orkney that I started to consider a long-term project. There was a huge amount of interesting seaweed and other bits and pieces washed ashore in interesting shapes on Orkney, and I really started to consider putting together a project, and that's in fact what I did. Now, I haven't got enough images yet to really put them all together, but it's something that has continued while I've been back here in Northern Ireland, and a lot of these images have just been taken handheld with my little Fuji X100T. But yeah, there could at some point be maybe a bit of a book or something in there, if I can collect maybe another handful of images. Stepping away from the smaller details, and I don't think any trip to Orkney is complete without a trip up to Yesnaby. This is an incredibly wild place, especially on a windy day, with incredible cliffs, incredible details in the rocks in the foreground, just beautiful. And again, you can see here some really stunning light. And again, it was a location that I managed to pick up a couple of images. I haven't yet shared them, and I'm still in the way of processing them, but a couple here of images that I'm quite pleased with, especially the one on the right hand side. And pretty sure this would be an incredible place to watch a really big storm blow in. And then our last night on Orkney, before getting the ferry back across onto Scotland mainland, we treated ourselves to a little chippy along the harbour, and then headed out of town for a last park up camp, just a little sort of park up here. And it was an incredible trip. As I say, I think mostly the images that I made there were all about the smaller details, and Orkney is certainly somewhere, and I think it's the ferry from mainland Scotland is only about an hour and a half. Very camper van friendly. Of course, it was pre-COVID days. Hopefully they will still be the same. There are a number of campsites if you're wanting to do that, or in fact, car camp maybe with a tent. But it's certainly worth exploring. Give yourself a couple of weeks somewhere a little bit different rather than the normal places like the Outer Hebrides. Shetland, of course, probably just trumped it a little bit, but you're talking a much more taxing journey to get out of logistical wise to get out to Shetland. Whereas Orkney, it's an hour and a half, so I would certainly recommend a visit there, and it's somewhere that we'd both like to go back to at some point in the future. So I don't have a photographer of the week this week, but I do have an image of the week, and this is one that I've been coming back to, and I'm loving doing this because it really is, forcing is the wrong word because I love looking at other people's work, but I'm loving taking time over the images. And what I'm doing, I think I mentioned this before, if I'm choosing an image of the week, I'll leave it as an open tab on my browser, and I'll just go in and just sit with a coffee and just sit and look at it. Just beautiful. So we'll jump back over to the screen and we'll talk about this week's image of the week. My image of the week this week is from photographer Steve Palmer, and immediately when I saw this, I just fell in love with it. Now, in the UK here, the last couple of weeks, we've had some extremely frosty conditions. Not really frosty here on the coast of Northern Ireland, unfortunately, but certainly a lot of my social media feeds have been full of people out shooting images like this. But I would say that this is certainly one of my favourites of a little intimate frozen scene. Very subtle light. Now, what I love about images like this when it's subtle light, I think if Steve was able to make this image again in overcast conditions, I'm pretty sure that you would really then notice how much of a difference that subtle light is making. But you're not really thinking about the light as in your first forethought. It's really just that lovely subtle light. It's an image within an image, because not only do you have these lovely patterns, but it immediately, I'm sure it does you too, it immediately just makes you think of maybe a vase or a plant or something sort of growing up, a tree or something. And I really love that about it as well. Some beautiful, beautiful shapes. I really love all of these little ice bubbles that have formed, and they almost get sort of lighter and lighter as you go up through the image. Again, sort of thinking about maybe a story in here. It could be seen as snowdrop or snowflakes falling. But I think that's a lovely little touch in the image. I think the gaps in the ice really bring something to the image. I think if this was all, I think if the full image or the full ice was completely sort of covered in, I'm not sure it would be as strong for me anyway. And I just love how the little gaps really just let you see what's below there. I especially love this one, where it's actually just the whole length of the reed. Really, really beautiful. Speaking of what's beneath, if you allow your eye to really just wander through the image and settle on the image, you start to really see what's going on below it. And I'm sure if we were to zoom in and really kind of, you can just see sort of little areas of the reeds below, and I really love that. And it's not something that's immediately obvious. Here's another one here and through here, but taking time with an image, you really start to see little subtleties such as that. Really nice use without being forced of kind of borders or corners. I love how things are kind of nicely positioned coming in from the top right hand side. There's a lovely flow to the image here. Really, really nice. And then finally, just this little detail here. A little trapped, I think it's a trapped leaf or something. I really, really love that. Just a wee hint of green actually in there as well. But I love that. It almost looks like a fish kind of swimming through. And again, maybe that's where we can have another image within an image now that I'm sort of looking at it again. Maybe this is sort of an underwater scene and we just have this little fish kind of sheltering amongst the reeds. But no, a really beautiful image. And as I said, my social media feeds have been full of images such as this, frozen puddles, and they've all been really nice. But I think this has been one of my favourites, if not my favourite image. So thanks a lot, Steve, for sharing that. Now, in a previous image of the week, I spoke about how much I was enjoying the image from Damien Shields. And completely unexpected, I let obviously Damien know that I was sharing his image, and he offered to send me a print of the image. Now, it's in its cellophane wrapper at the moment, but what a wonderful, wonderful gesture. And I know this was not expected, and I don't expect other photographers to do this, but it's, removing myself from the social media feed, taking time, making connections. Just what a wonderful gesture. We've already sort of picked out a position for it in our lounge. We're going to get a nice mount and a frame for it and get that up on the wall. So thanks very much, Damien. It is beautiful, and an image that, as I say, I really, really loved, and to see it in print is just fantastic. Wonderful. So how about a couple of little something for the weekend just to wrap things up. So first up, David Ward. Now, David actually created a brand new website a couple of months ago, something I've been longing for him to do for so long, and it is, if you haven't had a chance yet to look at David's work on his website, probably one of the most inspirational group of images that you're going to see out there today. Get yourself off social media, grab a coffee, grab a tea, grab something smoky, whatever, and spend half an hour looking at his work. But actually, it's not that I want to sort of highlight. It's the fact that in the last couple of weeks, he's also added a bunch of prints to his store. Now, I believe these prints were created by Joe Cornish. So on one hand, you have David's vision and David's images, and then on the other hand, you have working in collaboration with Joe Cornish to create some, I'm sure, masterful and beautiful prints. Now, as I've said before, my little artist's pledge, where if and when I manage to sell, or each time I sell 5 prints, I look to purchase something from another photographer. While I may have to look down the back of the sofa for a couple of extra credits there, I would love to own a David Ward print or two. So I think that's maybe what I'm going to treat myself at some point in the future. But have a look at his work, stunning work, and you won't be disappointed, I'm sure, if you pick up a print. So in last week's Sunday vlog, I talked about wanting to put together a little photo book from my time here, sort of wandering around the coastline here in Portrush. And inspiration for creating photo books has come from a number of different people. But I think the one person who has inspired me the most is photographer and artist Shona Grant. Now, some of the books that she has been making are incredible. Absolutely incredible. They almost go beyond the boundaries of just a simple book. I would argue that they are pieces of art in their own right. Sometimes it's a standard photo book with a number of different images in them. Sometimes it's a single image that she has sort of presented in different ways, in different forms. And I can almost imagine it's not just a visual treat, a number of these books, but also a tactile treat as well. Some of the materials and some of the techniques that she's using. So I'm just looking to make and get more proficient with making a very standard folded or threaded book. But it must be incredible to have your work presented in such a way. And what a wonderful, wonderful piece of art to own, especially as a number of these pieces are one-off books. You know, a single book, a single item, just wonderful. So go on over to Shona's webpage and take a look at some of the books that she has created. They just look incredible, and perhaps one day I'm going to have to sell a heck of a lot of prints here, because that's something else one day that I would love to own, one of her books. So how often have you found yourself being quite jealous of a neighbour, a friend, a work colleague, envious of that social media stream of the photographer's work that you're looking at, envious of their travels, envious of their achievements? We've all been there. I've certainly been there. And of course that jealousy, that kind of want for something else, comes at a price. It's a price of not appreciating what we have ourselves. And this little movie, The Neighbour's Window, kind of tries to depict that a little bit in a beautiful, haunting at times, thought-provoking way. I think we can all relate to this, but hopefully it also helps us open our eyes a little bit to what we have right now. Be thankful for even just the little moments. And it's certainly something that I'm trying to do in my photography, but also in my life in general. Oh, and by the way, I'm not crying, you're crying. Alright guys, well once again, thanks a lot for catching up in the van. I haven't got the heater on and it's pretty cold, and that wind does sound like it's getting and feels like it's getting much stronger. So I'm going to take all of this footage, head up into the home office, grab a cup of tea, put it together and get it out there on the YouTubes. But once again, thanks a lot for watching, and we will catch up on Sunday when I'm wandering around a little woodland, as you do. Alright guys, until next time, take care. Bye bye.